be, I think what I'll do is I'll ask the judges to very briefly talk about who we are, and I'll go first. I'm Gail O'Brien. I am an executive coach. I have a corporate background in ethics and ethics and culture and leadership. Yes, I knew there was something else. And I'm delighted to be with you with our three judges who I will, actually we have two judges. Leon, would you go first, and then Preston, and then David? We have three judges. That's right.
Hi, I'm Leon Goldman. I'm currently the chair of the advisory board of the Hoffman Center for Business Ethics at Bentley University. And prior to that, my career was as a privacy officer and a compliance officer in healthcare.
Preston?
Hi guys, I guess I'll go. Preston Quo. I'm just relevant to you guys. I'm not an engineer, I'm not that smart, but I'm on the Security Advisory Committee for the U.S. State Department, and I do a lot of work with the U.S. State Department abroad, and I basically help the government as well as big companies balance ethics with business, especially, and my realm is China, so in a really hairy, ethically gray area.
And I'm Dave Basilewicz. I am a compliance manager at Olympus Corporations. We work in the med tech and life science industries. So interested to hear this presentation.
Terrific. I have the unfortunate role of being a harsh taskmaster regarding time. So you'll have to forgive me when I tell us time is up. I'm going to invite each of you to make sure that you have your phones or whatever and are aware of your time, because I'll have to stop us at 30 because that's the maximum. We're going to stay in role and not interrupt you during your time doing that. Then we do the Q&A where we're in role, and then we give you feedback to hope that we have something to offer you for tomorrow's wonderful presentations. I need to read you something you already know, but it's important to just clarify it. In the full presentation, you're taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you're finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes during the Q&A. Both you and the judges stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside of role playing, like as we are as normal human beings. And some important things to keep in mind: the ethical aspects of your analysis today are the most important part. However, these should be described in simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical, philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. During the presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. And when you're ready to start, we'll start. But if you would set your timer in such a way so that you know where you are. And I'll be coming in at 30 minutes to stop you right away if you go that long. Let me know when you're ready.
Awesome, thank you, ma'am. Just let me get my timer set up and I'll be starting shortly.
And do you need a split screen for any reason?
No, ma'am, I don't believe so.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the Amazon Board of Directors. My name is Patrick Elter, and today is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the business analysis that our consulting team has been working on, focused on the question of: should Amazon use artificial intelligence enhanced algorithms for price discrimination? So as we all know, Amazon is the e-commerce company with the largest share of the e-commerce market and economy in the United States today. And as such, the policies that Amazon introduces and decides to carry on going forward will have a tremendous impact on the welfare of both its customers and honestly on the average American life in some form or fashion. And so to just think about a little bit of context, we are now in this era of big data where we have the ability to, as Amazon is an online platform, track tremendous amounts of data using cookies and machine learning algorithms in order to build up what we would call a personalized profile on each individual customer. And the question here is, would Amazon be able to use this new technology and all this data to better the old business model and to increase the profit margins and the bottom line for the company? And so if we look at our current business model of Amazon, we see that we have essentially a marketplace, an online marketplace with either no control or very little control over a consumer's willingness to pay for any given product, and little or no control over the costs of these products, since Amazon is largely not making these products, but rather just selling them in its marketplace. And so if we want to make more profit in the bottom line, pretty much the only thing that Amazon has control over is the price of these products that are being sold. And so a natural question with this newfound vast amount of data paired with ever increasing technological capabilities is there a way that we can use this new technology and data in order to increase profit? And the way that we might consider to do this is price discrimination, which is essentially where we take two customers and we charge them different prices for the same product. And this can be done in many different ways. But essentially, the reason that our consulting team is here today is to consider the financial, legal, and ethical dimensions that would be involved with making such a decision for Amazon. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Duncan to talk about our financial dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So I'd like to start off. I know Patrick talked about this and touched on this just a little bit. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. So price discrimination is really about charging different people different prices for the same good. And they would do this because naturally, everybody has a different willingness to pay for different products, right? So you could, if you line 10 people up in a room and ask them how much they would pay for, let's say a gallon of milk, they would all range and vary amount how much they would be willing to pay. They would all be around the same, but it would be a slight difference. So what price discrimination is doing here is it is charging them different prices, and ideally closer to their maximum price they would be willing to pay in order to make more money, right? So instead of charging the least amount, you would try to kind of negotiate closer to what they would be willing to pay. And we've seen price discrimination for a long time now. It is not a new concept. We see this with, for example, coupons. It's a classic way of price discriminating, where you basically give coupons out to people who would not buy the product at a certain price, but since you lower it, they are now willing to buy it for that new price. And we are also seeing this in the classic like bargaining for different goods, right? If you're on the side of the road and you're arguing with someone trying to buy, let's say some fruit, that is a form of price discriminating because you were trying to meet closer to that number they would be willing to pay. So the question here is really, how is this different, right? How is using AI and these algorithms and big data to, price discriminate, how is it different? And the real difference is it's like a shift in power, right? Where the producers have nearly all the power in this negotiation, where they can accurately depict how much a person is willing to pay with a very precise and exact number of how much they would be willing to pay. And these models are vastly greater than any person could do on their own. So the economics of this is that if we build a profile and we start charging these people at the exact price that they would be willing to pay, we can increase profit in the long run, right? So it would be, if you see in the classic Econ 101 curves, you can see that the consumer surplus and the producer surplus typically split it, but this would be shifting the line up so that you would have the producers would be getting all the surplus. And these models, as I mentioned before, are very effective. And how they work is we gather a lot of information, a lot of data from our customers, which we already have. We have been collecting data for a long time, or Amazon has been collecting data for a long time on their customers. And we can now create these profiles using AI and train these algorithms up so that they can start to accurately predict how much people would be willing to pay. And some people will be arguing, hey, how powerful are these algorithms really? They'll be like, it seems like a good in practice, but they aren't that good. And just I gave some examples of how powerful these algorithms can be is we can see it in SuperTarget. In the past 2000s, SuperTarget had a question they wanted to answer, and that was a person pregnant or not? Was a shopper pregnant or not? And they found that if they could target newly married expecting mothers, they would retain those customers for a long period of time. So they wanted to find out if their customers were pregnant or not. So they decided to hire a consulting company that went up and tried to answer this question, and they used AI to do this. And they were so accurate with this that they could predict if a mother was pregnant before she even knew, just based on their shopping history. And it was to a point of, I believe it was 98% accurate within the first month of their shopping at their store. So it was wildly successful. So if we could use this same product or the same idea in our online business, we could drastically increase our profits. And furthermore, this could also be a barrier to entry, right? Because if you had another business trying to encroach on our market share, this AI would be able to undercut them in a way that they could not enter this business because we already had such a strong tight hold on this market. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Duncan. Good evening, Board of Directors for Amazon. My name is Michael Norris, and this afternoon I will be addressing the legal aspects of using price discrimination for Amazon. Now, being a business that operates across state lines and on an international level, in the United States, price discrimination suits fall under the purview of the Federal Trade Commission. Now, particularly, there's a specific legal definition for price discrimination that I think is important to bring up aside from the financial definition that we've already heard. In this particular scenario, legal experts define price discrimination as a difference in price for goods which are of the same or like quality that cannot be explained by a difference in marginal cost. Now, in this particular situation, there are three different ways that you can be damaged by using price discrimination. The first is exploitative damages. Now, these would typically consist of charging an exorbitant amount for a product. In the United States, this is typically not an incredible issue, whereas our laws typically allow for it. However, in other countries, especially in the United Kingdom or in the European Union, this could easily constitute a legal suit. However, today we'll be focusing on the United States law. Now, moving forward, there are two other kinds of damages. There are primary line damages, which typically consist of seller-seller competitive damages. Now, with these, you would typically be looking at reducing competition within a particular area. I apologize for that. Moving forward, a second line violation would consist of issues between a manufacturer and a retailer. Now, with Amazon, this would not be as big of an issue, so we'll be focusing on the primary line. Now, primary line violations are typically handled by the Robinson-Patman Violation Act, as it was amended by the Clayton Antitrust Act. In this particular situation, there are 4 legal prongs which must be met to have a legal suit underneath this act. Now, the first one is that that you must be dealing with a commodity, not a service, and that it must be a purchase and not a lease. With Amazon, this would absolutely follow through for all of our purchases, as we are in fact selling products and we are not lending products. Secondly, there must be evidence that there has been actual financial damage to other competitors. Being a large firm like Amazon, this would likely be the case, depending on the degree to which price discrimination was sought. Thirdly, there must be a crossing of state lines, which with Amazon typically occurs. And finally, the goods must be of like or the same quality. Now, usually for Robinson-Patman violations, there are 2 primary defenses. The first is that the difference in the products can be explained by some of their form aside from just their quality. However, in Amazon's case, this would not particularly be the case, as most of the products would be of the exact same quality, and there wouldn't be a great explanation for why we're price discriminating except for an attempt to increase profits. The other defense would be that it would be that you are attempting to match a competitor's price. With Amazon, in this particular case, this would not apply either, because we are not trying to match a competitor's price. We would be attempting to move our own profit margins up. Now, moving forward, the other type of violation that you could see is a Section 5 violation for the American Consumer Protection Act. This would be deceiving a consumer or using some sort of a deceptive action in order to increase profits. You see this with cases like Priceline Hotels and Hilton Hotels, where customers suggested that they were willing to pay a particular price, and after that they were charged that price through like hidden fees. That is to say that the hotel that they were purchasing wasn't actually the price that was advertised. Instead, they were paying an additional price based on what they said they were willing to pay. This certainly presents a potential threat towards Amazon with price discrimination, as there is certainly an avenue where you could charge a customer more based on if they're willing to pay more for a product than other customers. And this would likely be through hidden fees or some other manner of going forward. This could be handled through a consent form, though. Now, as for my final recommendations based on the totality of the legal perspective, there are a great deal of legal damages which could occur to Amazon based on price discrimination cases, and legal precedent which has been established through a multitude of Supreme Court cases. Now, as I've established, these primarily come from 2 different places. First, Robinson-Patman Act violations, and secondarily, American Consumer Protection Act violations. Focusing on the first one, I'd like to address the precedent established by 2 Supreme Court cases which could illustrate the damages that Amazon could suffer as a result of these violations. The first one is Morton Salt versus the Federal Trade Commission. In this situation, the defendant, Morton Salt, was accused of using price discrimination to sell salt to different retailers at separate prices. They were found guilty of this, and as a result were issued a cease and desist order. This is certainly a possibility, but I believe that the more likely situation would fall under another case, which is Texaco versus Texaco Realtors, which occur. The Texaco, Realtors. My apologies. So in this particular case, Texaco was found guilty of price discrimination, was ordered to pay $500,000 in damages to the issued realtors. Now, in this scenario, the damages are the more interesting part, because with Amazon, the customer base would be much higher than the 12 defendants that were found in that case. Thus, you could be looking at a very high amount of damages paid out. The final risk would be further investigation by the FTC into monopolistic practices, which could severely damage the business. Being broken up as a monopoly could be incredibly dangerous to Amazon, and being found guilty of some sort of an antitrust violation could be a serious problem for not only Amazon in the United States, but particularly in the European Union, where they have been cracking down on monopolies lately. A great example of this would be Microsoft. Now, as for the second violation, potential damages would likely be financial. Like in the case of Priceline and Hilton Hotels, any damaged parties were awarded financial compensation at the expense of the defendant, which in this case is Priceline Hotels. These would likely be more minor than a Robinson-Patman Act violation, but still would present financial loss to the company, as well as likely a cease and desist order from the Federal Trade Commission. Summarily speaking, price discrimination is wrought with legal difficulties, and to engage in it might work in the short term, but in the long term, Amazon would most certainly be looking at a customer base which would be dissatisfied with the practices and would likely seek financial compensation, as well as a cease and desist order from the Federal Trade Commission. Thank you for your time. And with that, I would like to pass things over to Patrick.
Thanks, Mike. So on to the meat of the discussion, which is the ethical considerations of using price discrimination, or using artificial intelligence enhanced algorithms for price discrimination. So there are a myriad of ethical considerations and difficulties that come with using artificial intelligence enhanced algorithms for price discrimination. But first, it might be helpful to go over certain types of price discrimination that we already use and that as a society we deem to be okay, right? And so these are forms of price discrimination that you might say are equitable because they are service-based or non-arbitrary. And so an example of this would be, let's say you want a package from Amazon, right? Well, if you want it tomorrow, that's going to cost more than if you get it a week from now. And so that's a form of price discrimination where Amazon can say, depending on when you want your package, it could cost a different price, right? Or maybe you live in an area that is more difficult to get packages to and from. And that would be another reason that there could be price discrimination, right? But a lot of the ethical considerations that are involved with price discrimination have to do with price changes that could be seen as somewhat arbitrary, right? Such as if you are familiar with the pink tax, which is the idea that two things that look exactly the same, but one of them is pink and one of them is not, the pink product is almost always more expensive, even though there's no inherent difference in the quality of that good, right? And that is a form of price discrimination targeted towards a specific gender within our society. And you can see certain issues like that start to build up when you have the ability to price discriminate so effectively. And so two things we want to look at that could affect that sort of arbitrary price discrimination is imperfect data and biased algorithms, right? So what I mean by imperfect data is we don't have a perfect set of data on any person, right? No matter how much data we have gathered on each individual person, no matter how much we think we know about a given consumer, we don't have perfect data. And what's more, we probably have more data on certain demographics of people than other demographics of people. We might even have more data on certain specific individuals within a specific demographic than within individuals in that same demographic. And so what happens is if AI is given this limited amount of data or this imperfect data to work with to create an algorithm, then it might produce an algorithm that creates inequitable outcomes for the people for the consumers, for the customers, which is a problem in two ways. One, it probably hurts the consumer in some way. And two, it'll probably come back to bite Amazon in the butt when people realize this and complain about it. And they probably lose a lot of social capital, which is very important for a large company like Amazon. Another issue that I'd like to address is the idea that surplus is, in this case, a zero-sum game, in the sense that when we're looking at the consumer surplus and the producer surplus between Amazon and the consumer, what we see is that in order for Amazon to gain more profit, right, in order to use a new business model where we're price discriminating to get more profit, it is only going to be able to take surplus from the consumers. And so essentially, you're going to create a situation where you are potentially even excluding some demographics from the market when you change the price in this arbitrary way. Next, we have privacy and security issues. This is a very, very extensive subject that we can't get too far into, but everyone knows that in this day and age, your data is being collected by Amazon and by other companies. And they have to, if they're taking that data, they have to protect it. Because what happens if Amazon collects all this data on you and then it doesn't protect it, and some hacker is able to access your very personal information and use that to harm you or any number of Amazon's customers. And that is a major issue. There's also issues of consent and transparency, which our consulting member, Jacob, will get into in just a moment. So I'm going to pass it over to Jacob.
Thank you, Patrick. So to address what we are recommending, the concrete steps Amazon takes, we are touching on 4 key areas to avoid, both because they present moral hazards of some sort, as well as potential financial burdens. So our core goal is for Amazon to avoid unnecessary discrimination, perceived discrimination, unethical violations of consumer privacy, and illegal behavior. And we believe that as long as Amazon complies with these 4 concerns, it'll be able to function both as an ethical company, it won't take on any undue financial burdens, and it'll be able to continue to uphold its fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders. So the first step to do this is to jettison all illegal forms of discrimination. So to be very cautious and avoid incorporating immutable characteristics into any form of algorithm you use to evaluate consumers. So avoid using things such as race, sexual orientation, gender aspects like that, which are often both explicitly legally protected from discrimination, as well as carrying certain moral concerns because of the fact that they're immutable and unchanging, as opposed to more neutral categories of things such as film preferences, or perhaps most importantly, legitimate needs, factors that legitimately drive the need for variable pricing. So incorporating variable pricing when necessary is our second recommendation. And so that's making use of key factors like time and location, which both generally need variable pricing. Sometimes it's more expensive to do business in certain areas or to ship to certain areas based off of factors such as population density, infrastructure, cost of living, cost of wages, as well as time to prepare, time to ship. Time and geography are the 2 best factors to employ for forms of price discrimination, both ethically and financially. That is both because they avoid most of the legal hazards. They're generally acceptable reasons to discriminate, commonly done by businesses as varied as Amtrak, USPS, FedEx, incorporating various forms of time-based or geography-based discrimination. And it's also important to understand as in some ways even the ethical responsibility of Amazon to discriminate on the basis of these, because while there is the issue of price discrimination, there's also the ethical issue of denial of service. So as long as Amazon is making prices variable, it's more likely to be able to provide goods and services to remote areas, expensive areas, other places it might not be able to do business with if it didn't employ any form of price discrimination. As long as it's harking to these more legitimate factors, it will likely both be safe legally, though it should take care to avoid using legitimate factors like time or geography as proxies for illegitimate factors. For example, if the algorithms that you use are starting to reflect the time patterns of, say, stay-at-home moms, you might be entering into an area that's both legally and ethically concerning. The third recommendation is to focus on transparency and consent. So that both means that using transparency, such as sharing data with watchdogs, and in many cases, the public, will both prevent Amazon from going into the wrong side of gray legal and moral areas. For example, the previous issue of using geography as a proxy for immutable characteristics or time as a proxy for immutable characteristics. By being transparent about what is going into the algorithm, at least with watchdog groups, if not the general public, will allow Amazon to ensure that it's getting preemptively warned by concerned individuals before it enters into areas of serious ethical or legal concerns. Secondly, it is more ethical to be doing things in a transparent way and with people's explicit consent because it's respecting their agency as individuals. And this actually touches on one of the key advantages Amazon has in this, which is Amazon Prime, which is a massive source of hundreds of millions of people who often are willing to waive away certain protections they might otherwise enjoy in order to enjoy better service. It's giving people the option to do things like exchange more information about themselves, more data about themselves in return for better prices, which both gives Amazon broader legal freedoms to employ forms of morally and legally acceptable discrimination, as well as giving it a huge source of data to use for that. A key area this can be used, for example, is like frequency of advertising deals or other forms of targeted offers that might entice people to, say, spend more money or inform them more effectively of products they're interested in and it would be worthwhile for them to purchase or consume. Next, it's important for Amazon to comply with data gathering ethics. So this is, once again, hammering home the issue of consent and legal compliance with variable, often stricter standards like those set forth in the EU, which has added all sorts of additional protections, as was previously noted during the brief on the legal issues. This connects also with the need to safeguard information and privacy. Amazon has a lot of experience in this. Amazon Web Services is one of the most widely used sources of cloud computing. So they have a lot of in-home expertise to protect people's data when they're using it for the purposes of advertising or price discrimination when it's legitimate, legal, and ethical. And so ensuring that that data is kept safe is key to being able to do this in an ethical, legal, and profitable way. And the final concern, and one of the biggest, is the issue of preempting regulation. There is clearly an enthusiasm for the regulating of big tech-based businesses at the moment, a potentially real financial concern of trust busting. Gary Gensler was just approved by the Senate, who has taken a more aggressive stance on financial firms in the past. And we firmly believe that the best safeguard against burdensome business ethics regulations, which can potentially harm the bottom line of companies, as well as undermine its ability to provide profits to shareholders. And that the best way to safeguard against these is to conduct business in an ethical way. Similarly, the best way to avoid trust busting regulations for monopolizing behavior is to avoid monopolistic behavior. And that we believe that complying with our previously recommended steps and avoiding the 4 key sources of harm, unnecessary discrimination, perceived discrimination, unethical violations of consumer privacy, and illegal behavior, Amazon will avoid many of these regulatory risks, which are hard to price in, but are very real. That concludes our recommendations. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. I'm wondering how you will ensure that algorithms are really fair based on a Carnegie Mellon computer scientist recently saying that it's a long, long way off for that fairness to happen in algorithms. I understand some of what you said, but I'm wondering, to the issue of fairness, how would Amazon, even though we're working obviously toward all of this, fairness is still up for grabs, don't you think? And how would we hone in on that?
We believe that the best tool in Amazon's toolbox to deal with this specific issue is, once again, transparency. So the advantage of being open with what factors you're incorporating and what logic you're using in any sort of algorithm you do to predict consumer behavior or identify consumers, as long as that's being shared with at least watchdog groups, if not the broader public as a whole, will allow you to get a lot of forewarning. So there are lots of people who are deeply and genuinely interested in making AI fair, making algorithms fair, making the future a fair future for everyone. And so likely, if you are getting into an area where you might be taking unfair or unethical actions, you'll get prior warning of at least some watchdog groups will hone in on it.
Thank you. Judges?
aside from having to pay a different price because it's more difficult to deliver to me, what else would make price discrimination fair? I mean, it's the same product. It's exactly the same. You've had to spend as much to produce it and to transport it to the warehouse. Just because you can get it out of me, how do we defend that beyond just it costs us more to send it to you, so we're going to charge you more? Anyone?
So once again, we think part of this is why we touched on things like Amazon Prime and the ability of people to consent, is because often there's things that people find particularly attractive that they're willing to pay a premium for. So this is both stuff like the time stuff, people are willing to pay a premium for early access to things. There are ways to make products slightly different, and getting information to predict people's behavior helps you identify when that will be a worthwhile exchange for them. Similarly, the second aspect of that was, as we touched on, targeted advertising and deals. So there is an acceptable form of price discrimination of sales and discounts, which, while universally accessible, it's very useful to have information to know when that's most potent. So like the most obvious example is stuff like, Christmas, everyone wants to buy toys, putting toys on a discount will help you sell more toys. And that's a case where actually, lowering the price is going to make more of a profit. But as we get more sophisticated tools, we might be able to recognize more niche areas of opportunity for that, minor events, or identifying patterns in people's days or weeks where they're more interested in purchasing certain types of products.
I could just hop in for a moment. So I was talking earlier about service-based pricing, right? Where if you were providing a service, that is a non-arbitrary form of price discrimination, right? And I think that applies as a general rule, that the reason that we can charge more for early access or sending something, shipping something along a farther geographic distance, or sending something to an area that has less packages going there, is it's costing the company more, right? It is costing Amazon more to send something there, which is why we can rationalize having a higher price. Because at the end of the day, when we look at surplus, right, because it's costing more for Amazon to send it there, we're going to end up with the same amount of surplus, even though we charge the higher price. It is that type of non-arbitrary, right? This is only based on service, right? The service being provided. It's not something based on your identity, such as like your gender or your race or political affiliation, right? Which we would consider to be a non-ethical way to price discriminate. I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if we wanted to use the algorithm or the AI, and we want to show transparency with all of our Amazon users, right? How are we getting the messaging out to them that we are doing this, that we're collecting this information? Because so many times big companies like ours can put in check yes terms and conditions, and no one reads those. And do we think that's right for something like this, which is gathering so much more information? How can we properly educate the Amazon users, when we want to implement something this big that's really going to be a little more invasive of their information than we might already be doing?
Yes, I can take this question. So I would say, moving forward with this, we should kind of have, and I don't know if you've ever seen like Credit Karma. They have this like breakdown of your credit score and kind of what impacts it the most, right? So they have 8 factors, and it's pretty basic, but they have like 8 factors, and they say this has high impact to low impact, and they then rate you on that. So you can kind of see where you scale on each of their grading factors, per se. Like just, for example, like a test, right? We have factors and matrices that like show where you go on the test. So I would say we should have that on another web page saying, hey, this is the other factors, how we are valuing you, like let's say there's 5 or 10 different variables. This is how you scored on each one of these, and this is how it impacts your overall, number that we gave you. Just being kind of open and clear.
Guys, I have a question. So we sell a baby crib. It's expensive wood. It's really well made. It's handmade, made in the USA. And that company has a premium on it, right? But due to the AI, we're able to see people in lower income and lower demographics and price that product to fit them. We're still able to that company's still able to make a margin, but we're now able to serve an audience that wouldn't normally get access to that. So how is this, help me understand how if we rate them, is that going to impact those consumers when they find out, hey, we're just doing you a favor, right? And at the same time, how's it going to impact people who are paying that premium going, why are we paying the premium on the product when people who maybe don't have as much of the means are able to access the product for a cheaper price?
I could take this one, sir. So to answer your question, there's certainly a very exciting aspect of price discrimination, which allows for underserved communities to enjoy particular prices which would not normally be afforded to them. Amazon's a very large company, and with that has the opportunity to adjust profit margins to take a little less off the top in particular situations. Now, as you pointed out, the downside of this is that particular customers would result in paying a premium for this. More wealthy customers would likely be calculated by the algorithm to be willing to pay a larger amount for particular items like a more expensive baby crib. As a result of this, we might see more wealthy customers depart from Amazon. However, it is our opinion that the corporation is large enough and far-reaching enough and enough assets that many of these customers would likely stay on. In fact, it might even benefit them to continue using Amazon services based on the convenience of services like Amazon Prime and the convenience of the website. Frankly, although there are certain risks involved with price discrimination, particularly with our more wealthy customers, we like to think that there's a certain advantage there that can be worth taking the risk for as far as serving underprivileged communities and so forth.
Do you have an example of where that's been transparent? I know it's a hard question, but do you have any idea where, because I agree with you, there is potentially an upside, but where have we potentially even seen that?
I can hop in here. So in doing some research for this project, I was looking into the history of price discrimination, and it actually kind of blew my mind that the price tag is actually a relatively new invention in human business history. And so before the price tag, there was always a system of price discrimination that was involved in bartering, right? So when you're bartering for a good, or even like when there were stores, but the price tag didn't exist yet, a salesperson would know how much every single thing in their store was worth, what the cost was, what the overhead was. And when an individual customer came in, they would give them a personalized price. They would give them a price based on certain factors that they thought, oh, this person looks very interested in my product. This person looks like they're looking for a bargain. They're looking for a deal. I know how much I can sell this for. We see that today with car salesmen, right? We all know that when you go to see a car salesman, they're going to give a different price to you based on different factors. And unfortunately, there are some factors that we would consider to be somewhat unethical, right? There's been studies that show that the color of your skin can impact the price that you were offered by a car salesman. And so we're afraid of seeing those exact same kind of aspects with the algorithms. And we're hoping that they can kind of overcome those faults of price discrimination that maybe we consider to be a little bit more equitable, or maybe be removing deadweight loss in society, right? If we have like a firm, as you said, that's trying to sell a certain product, we want to sell it to as many people as we can. And if people are willing to buy at a lower price and we can still make money at that lower price should we sell it to them. Sorry, I was a little all over the place. I hope I answered your question.
No, you're good. It's great because actually, if you guys are familiar with Alibaba,
Yes.
that's the big differentiator between their model and why they're number 2 to us, right? It's because they allow negotiating, right? It's a huge part of their purchase. At the same time, I forget. Anyway, it's good. It's good. That's good enough. Patrick is a good answer. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
I guess I'm tired of hearing from women's groups about privacy invasion. And when Duncan gave the example of collecting information about women, that seems to be fitting a pattern that women shopping habits and all of that create an opportunity for privacy invasion. I'm wondering how your recommendation would protect us from the perception that we are not treating fairly, to use that word again, both sexes or any number of sexes, depending on the privacy invasion.
Yes, ma'am. I can take this question. So that's kind of, I believe, why we wanted to be so open about the variables that we would be using or variables of interest in our model, is because if you showed that you were using, variables that people did not like, right? If using sex, for example, to determine a price, we believe that would make customers not deal with our business or not deal with Amazon anymore. That's why we would like to be, open about it. And that way we wouldn't choose those, undesirable variables that people don't like to be judged on, and it would just be more open and fair. So everybody would know kind of what they are being judged on, and it would be fair variables rather than, unfair ones.
Just a quick follow-up with that then. Given the fact that we have a very vocal public with a tremendous diversity of views about what's private and what's not, how would we do business, but at the same time try to protect people's various, senses of privacy? Where's the line that we can be transparent? And yes, watchdog group may not like this, but watchdog groups have a tendency sometimes to not like a lot. So how would that impact our ability to make revenue?
Honestly, ma'am, I think regardless, as you said, like watchdog groups don't like a lot of things. And sometimes watchdog groups are not indicative of how the general public feels. And we're not really trying to cater to watchdog groups, we're trying to cater to the general public because that's our consumer base, right? And so essentially, if the consumer base doesn't have a problem with the ethics of what we're doing, then and it is following the steps that we've outlined and therefore is an ethical process, then I don't think that we ought to be the most concerned about how the watchdog groups feel on every single issue. Now, certainly the watchdog groups perform a very, very important and helpful service to society to bring up issues that if people see them and realize, oh my gosh, this is huge, this is crazy, people are being discriminated against based on not just their purchasing history, but based on their sex or based on their race or based on their political affiliation, right? And that would probably be a big news story that the watchdog group brought it up, but general society is who actually made it an issue for Amazon's business model.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Really quick, on the supply side, again, back to vendors, is there with this transparency, and obviously it would bring, I'm assuming it would definitely bring down our margins. Would that change our demographic? Because I'm assuming, let's say premium products like Oakley is a good example. These guys who have their own websites, right? They don't choose to sell on us because they're not looking for the competitive buyer. So do you think that that might potentially impact the amount of higher quality items and or decrease or change our user base into a lower demographic?
Well, I can see that that could definitely be a concern. I really think that the appeal of Amazon is the scope of the business itself, right? The thing that Amazon offers as a service is just breadth. Amazon is international. It'll get you a package in a day if you're willing to pay the price. And Amazon works with so many different groups. And that is what Amazon offers to different firms, right? And so if a firm that sells an exclusive, maybe luxury or high-end product, like let's say Oakley, right? Let's say Oakley's doesn't want to use Amazon, well, then they don't have to, right? And furthermore, we would probably predict that they still wouldn't be using Amazon because they have their own algorithms, regardless of what Amazon chooses to use as their policy for price discrimination, right? Because it's probably very likely that Oakley's website has their own price discrimination algorithm that can already figure out whether it's going to offer a discount when you pop on their website based on information that they have on the individual consumer there. And so I really don't think it would be a huge issue for Amazon if we make these things more transparent, because Amazon is still offering all the services that people choose to use Amazon for. Right? Just because we're transparent doesn't mean that we're not still the largest e-commerce company in the United States. Just because we're transparent doesn't mean that we can't get a package shipped almost anywhere in the United States in a day, right? All the things that people like Amazon for will still be there. And so I don't think it'll be a huge issue. And if anybody else wanted to add on, please feel free.
Any other questions, judges? Apparently not. So we'll end this part of the presentation and go into the feedback in our own voices. I just want to say, for a start, and then I'll turn it over to the others and then come back to me later. I think that you were operating under a real challenge having a colleague not be able to be part of what I'm sure you all have rehearsed. So I give you a lot of credit for responding in the moment to what is part of life and what is part of constant change. And I also apologize in the interest of time. That is what I'm harping on these days, as long as I'm doing this. I never invited you each to indicate who you were at the beginning. And I'd like to just take a second now, albeit as late as it is, to please invite you to introduce yourselves. And I apologize again for not doing that at the outset.
Thank you, ma'am, for your understanding. Really appreciate it. We'd love to take a minute to introduce ourselves. My name is Patrick Elter. I'm a second-year cadet at West Point, and I major in economics and Arabic. And then I guess I'll pass it on to Jacob Foster.
I am Jacob Foster. I'm also a second-year cadet at West Point. I'm majoring in international history with a minor in grand strategy. And I will pass it on to Mike.
Hey, Jacob. Evening, everyone. My name is Michael Norris. I think we're all second-year cadets here. But I am a major in American politics with a minor in Spanish.
And my name is Duncan Hazlett. I am a major in data science and applied stats. And as Mike said, I am also a second year.
Thank you very much. And now I will invite the judges to speak in their own voice. And Leon, would you go first?
Thank you. First of all, I have to commend you guys for doing this short one person and for doing it without slides and talking directly to us. That is a tough challenge. I found myself somewhat confused during part of it, because the other thing you've done is to bite off two enormous challenges. One is price discrimination, but the other is a much larger problem of black box AI algorithms, which is consuming the entire technology world, is to figure out how do you deal with them. It was helpful to me near the end, Patrick, when you talked about what led you to do this, because then it seemed to me this could be divided into the history of price discrimination being a black box, because you'd walk in and the black box was the person selling it to you, making decisions in their head, to price labels, which hopefully took away the black box for us, to now going back to a black box. And what would make customers leery is we have no idea how you're deciding anymore. Again, it happened before and it's happening again. And tying that to Amazon's larger problem of AI algorithms and inherent discrimination, and moving it to the point that this is a small part of the world where Amazon could experiment with a more transparent and open way of doing algorithms, which is what's being argued throughout the technology world. Who are the people who should sit on the boards that review the algorithms? Is it the government? Is it the privacy advocates? Or is it the public? Or is it who? And that to me, as I thought about it, that's sort of what ties together what you were presenting. There was a black box, it went away, it's coming back in an even worse way. Amazon faces a much larger problem, and this is a small piece of it. And it's a good way for them to experiment because it's more manageable for them. But I enjoyed the presentation, and I commend you for what was. I would have tackled this for anything, you guys. I would have stayed away from it. But thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Leon on a bunch of those points. First, I think for having no slides, I never felt like I was drifting away from the presentation. I think each of you presented with, a very engaging manner that it was easy to follow along with what you were saying. I think you guys presented the legal landscape very well, the ethical landscape very well. Your suggestions of what to do. I probably went back and forth 5 or 6 times on which way I actually felt about price discrimination during the presentation. So it's not an easy thing to just say, here's the answer, right? And so I think you guys did a very good job of presenting the pros and cons, the risks, all of that. Duncan, in your answer to my question, I would love it if Amazon had another website where I could see how they're evaluating and how the information they're collecting from me, because I would be, one, really worried about what I'm doing that they would know, but 2, just interested to know what Amazon does, and so I think that was an interesting suggestion. One thing I'll mention, because I know each of the next rounds start to focus down on the ethics a little more, is really try to pare down your discussion to the ethics part of it, right? So why ethically would it be right or wrong to use the algorithm, right? And I know in this format, you had to touch on each of the topics. Just now focus on a little bit more of the ethical side of it. How do we avoid using certain data points when some of those data points might be necessary to determine their shopping or purchasing patterns? So I think great job, very well balanced. So I congratulate you guys on the presentation.
Guys, I appreciate that the guys, the other judges have. I agree with their appreciation of how far you've come. A few things I'm going to be a little more harsh. If I only because this is purely out of love. Okay, so if we are going to sit, I'm assuming in a realistic situation, we're sitting and listening to multiple presentations as a company. I'm assuming that visuals, I'm not saying a PowerPoint because I actually dislike PowerPoints a lot, but visuals to help keep ideas clear, and especially the ideas you're trying to punch through, I think are very helpful. And I would say necessary, but I see PowerPoints for a living. So second is, I do understand you had a person out, and I don't know whether that, how much that plays a role into what you're doing, but I'm also going to hold you just to a little bit of different standard because of my work with the US government and because of friends from West Point. That's not an excuse for if you didn't get something done, because I just believe that, hey guys, that's part of the deal, right? And like I said, I do work in DC, so that's something that I would have liked to have seen you guys. Although you did a great job, if you had these things in mind, I would have liked to have seen something from that, right? Overall, don't forget that the audience is a first-person audience. Play along, right? So when you use Amazon examples, you're talking about our company. So address us. We like the way that you've done this. You've been we recognize how your company has done ABCD. I'm just playing into role playing, and I think it adds an element to the reality of you guys doing it. In real when you do it again later in real life. The legal, I had a note, sorry, on the legal examples. I'll try to find it, but I really liked. There was so much good legal information, but it was hard for me to appreciate all of it because I couldn't, without taking notes and pulling away from what you were saying, I couldn't really help appreciate, how far or how clear your points were, just because there was a lot. That's it.
Thanks very much. I want to focus on tomorrow in particular in the 10-minute. It's really important, and I'm going to quickly just read the directions. You've been called back by the company you gave the full presentation to for a second visit, which means you've got to assume that even though it won't be the same people, it'll be one person. That's the board. Just assume that that person knows the background that was given today, so you don't feel a temptation to spend time with legal or to spend time with finance, because this is essentially about how you talk only about the ethical aspects of the problem and explain why your solution successfully handles any ethical issues. You only have 10 minutes. So if we can help you in the next few minutes to focus on a compelling case for that, I totally agree with Preston that you have great advantage when you acknowledge what Amazon is doing and make suggestions about what it could do more of. And when you speak to its self-interest in terms of the reality that Amazon is a target as one of the largest companies with with all kinds of things attached to it that doesn't necessarily help them with a lot of people in the public and mistakes that they've made, and their employees, having issues with them. So they've got to worry about the kind of company their company perceptions are. So your ability to frame things in the context of building trust, in the context of transparency, in the context of the values to them, I think are really important. I agree with Leon, you tackled about one of the hardest types of subjects. So this is an opportunity for you to figure out tonight how you want to frame in 10 minutes something that you feel pretty solid about in terms of what is. I loved it, and I think, Patrick, you did it more than others. I love the specific examples because a concept then gets to be honed in and understood more. And so to the degree that when you talk about transparency, it isn't just out there as a floating word, but you tie it into something that either another competitor has done better or something that Amazon is doing, and you see that there's another step that they could take. I mean, whatever you've got to work with, not trying to make things overly complicated, but based on the research you've done, if you hone in on just the ethics piece and just the part of the ethics piece that you think is the most important, that I think is going to help a lot to create a compelling case. In the real world, if you were invited back, you know automatically that people liked what you did, but it wasn't a sale yet. It didn't come together yet in their minds as why this is so important. So assume that, which you'll be doing in your careers anyway, assume that the best information that you can think of that will tie your points together in an effective way to get at what you're recommending is a very strong way to go about doing it. Any other judge have anything else to say before we invite the team to ask us any questions?
Well, I'll just say real quick that having given a million presentations myself, 10 minutes is going to go by like that, right? It's, as far as presentations go, it is a tiny, tiny amount of time. So like Gail said, pick out maybe 3 bullet points, right, that you really want to hit, because each of those you're going to be able to talk for 10 minutes alone on. You now have to cut that down to 1/3 of the size. So just pick a couple bullet points and then really, figure out what the several most important sentences you want to say are, because it's going to take up time, and then 10 minutes will be over and you'll be like, I wish I hadn't left these other things, sitting out there that I should have said earlier because I was kind of building up to it.
Any other thoughts, Preston? Or
No, it's just, to pick up on what David was saying, it's the old rule. If you have 3 bullet points, tell them about the 3 bullet points you're going to tell them the 3 bullet points, and then tell them you told them the 3 bullet points, and then leave.
well,
They will
just
definitely
make sure
remember
that-
those 3 bullet points.
That's right. And that's all you want. You want that stuck in their head, like a song that won't go away.
and just make sure they're your 3 most compelling points to
Mhm.
your point.
Mm-hmm.
Before you guys ask questions, I was just going to say, remember the competition again. You're having fun, guys. Like you're trying to sell me to give you all my money. So sex it up, guys. Like bring out your best, not wrong words, you know what I mean? Like make yourselves as be your best self in front of us and draw us to what is so great about you guys, right? So that's what I'm hoping for. Like we'd love to see more of you, because it's going to make a difference with all these presentations. It's like, in the end, I keep telling people, I'm buying you. So if I don't feel connected to you, if I don't feel like I want to give you all my money, if I don't feel I trust you, then like, it's not going to happen, right? You may have a decent case. Of course, your content is most important, but you're the ones who I assume is going to make sure that the work gets done. So let that come out. Like, remember, you're here to win, guys. So like, let's see it.
And I think it's also part of you knowing that obviously you're wonderfully prepared. And I think you probably all worked really hard to make this happen. And so that element of confidence really needs to go into tomorrow. You've picked an incredibly topical subject, and you have a chance with the feedback to think about how you connect the dots in ways that were different than the 30-minute that allow you to come together with an incredibly strong center, if that makes sense. The one other thing I want to say before you ask questions is in the 90-second, it is absolutely essential that you understand the directions. Over the years, a number of people have come up with creative ways of doing it. And the issue is IBEC is all about how you show up in the world that you're moving into after college and how ethics plays a key role in that. And so what we want is for you to have practice, and there will be times, whether it's in the military or whether it's in a corporation or whether it's in a university, where something comes up that has a clear ethical message and nobody says anything. And the goal of the 90-second is, if you were an employee and you heard something that came up, as you think about privacy, or as you think about, if you can tie it back to your own your own points today. You want to create the message in 90 seconds about the ethics of X or Y, and you bring that point out. And that's really what you're being judged on in the 90-second. How would you speak up, and how would you make a persuasive point, even though you have to make up a conversation in your head about what it is you would do? But that's the fun part, as Preston said, and we do want you to have fun. All right, it's your turn now to ask anything you'd like related to this.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll start us off with a question. First of all, I'd just like to say, thank you for all of your really insightful commentary. And just to address one thing, we really hope to represent West Point well, and I meant in no way to try and make an excuse when I discuss Annalise not being with us. Life happens.
None
and we
taken.
own that. But just to move on to the first question. So this is my first year. This is our whole team's first year doing IBECC. What separates the good teams from the great teams from your perspective? I'm assuming that you've seen multiple teams today, or you've seen multiple teams in the past. And what really, like, we want to be the best. What could make us the best?
I'll go first because I've probably been doing the IBEC stuff for almost 10 years. I think what matters is that when you do tomorrow in both presentations, you speak completely committed to the role that you're doing. You are that role. This isn't about a presentation. You aren't about, play acting. You are there. And you're using the best of your information to make a point that really matters to you. So when you pick those points, really develop something that you think is substantive and important that other people should care about. And you are voicing that to help save reputation or to help rebuild reputation. That's the mindset. And it's a mindset that I think is so important. Most of you did, and I wasn't able to watch everybody. I felt as if maybe some of you were reading, but I didn't feel as if others of you were reading. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't know if you have scripts there that you were looking at what you were doing, or whether you were doing it all off the cuff. Some of you were, I don't want to say better than others at looking as though you were speaking, and maybe you actually were speaking completely, not extemporaneously, but speaking to the way a conversation would be. IBEC normally doesn't allow the reading of any scripts when we're in person. Obviously, in COVID, it's really difficult to stop that. If you were reading and you have a role tomorrow, figure how you can internalize the language of it so that the connection is being made with whoever the judge is who's playing a role. Does that make sense? You all did well, don't misunderstand me, but there's something extra that happens when you're the role and you're speaking to something that you think is really important. And you can have certainly little notes and stuff, but you want to make it fluid, because 10 minutes isn't a lot. And so you're going to divide it up, I assume, between some of you. You're not all going to do it, are you?
No, ma'am. I believe the limit's 3.
Yeah, so you're going to divide that up. And so that's going to just build off each other's energy. and figure out how you can say what you want to say in ways that you're comfortable with. You're not going to be getting any questions from anybody, but based on the questions today, you might feel that there's some value in how you would add more detail, or how you would prevent there being a gaping question. And that comes with simplifying perhaps some. So those would be my suggestions. Leon, Preston, and David, what do you think?
I would agree with that. I think that sometimes what you have to do is, after you've spent all the time researching and you sort of have the question, is to ask yourself, okay, I'm in the elevator with somebody I never met, and they say, what are you doing? And you have 15 seconds and less than one sentence to put it all in. So when you look at what you're trying to say, if you had to tell me in 3 words or 1 sentence, what would that, and then from there you work backwards to the presentation, because now you know that's the lead, that's how you're going to finish, and what goes in the middle is just some supporting. But again, as we, even though it's a joke, you know, tell them what you're going to say, tell it to them, and then tell them you said it. You really do want to have assume this, you're in a boardroom or anywhere else, the attention span of the people you're talking to is about as good as a 2-year-old. And even if you're given 30 minutes to talk, you lost them at 10 minutes or earlier, because they're worried about, you know, the quarterly reports. They're worried about somebody called their office before they came in and said somebody stole something. And so you really have to think about how do you quickly grab their attention. And one way you guys are actually prepared to do that, not so much from this presentation, but by your training. I mean, if you're in the field, you don't get much time to do something. You have to be prepared to sort of quickly slice to the meat of the subject, think about what it has to, and to get the message across. And this isn't really any different. So, you know, with all of this that you presented, the thing about privacy, the thing about price discrimination. All right, if you got to tell me in 10 words what's most important, that's, now figuring out those 10 words ain't going to be easy. You guys are going to spend the next few hours arguing over what the actual 5 words, 10 words, 15 words are.
To add to what Gail and I think Leon touched on, the cohesion, even when asking a question, we don't have the 4 of you guys jumping on the answer. And so it seems that just however aligned you guys are, I'm assuming that you don't all have to have the answers, but I'm assuming you all should be of the same mind. So whatever it is, making sure you're all kind of one on it. And then even when you are presenting, it's nice that to transition into each other, again, with that sense of oneness. Right?
Yeah, and Patrick, to go back to what you said about kind of what sets the good apart from the rest, or the great apart from the rest, is preparedness, which you guys showed today, but obviously today now you kind of have to put behind yourselves, right? But that preparedness, so now, like everyone's talked about, when you come up with your 3 bullet points or your 10 words, whoever is presenting, say it aloud before you get into the room, right? Say it to yourself, say it to the mirror, say it to each other, but say it so you've heard it aloud, because sometimes I find myself tripping over words, and you don't have enough time to trip over words. So say it so that you're comfortable with it. Say it 10 times or whatever it takes. But that's part of the preparedness, you know, is just being ready for the moment.
Preston, anything else to say?
I'm gonna maybe just, it is difficult to present on these platforms, and that's why I think some of those things that we may catch in person maybe aren't as easy to present here, right? So that's why I think the feeling of the presentation is a lot. So I understand it's difficult. So maybe again, like everyone's saying, try imagining this again with the realities of you looking at a screen, and what are going to be the ways to help stay connected. Obviously, it really matters on punching in the content, but looking at the small things of visuals, the way that the 3 of you flow in your presentation, and the way that you're able to present, you know, with authority and feeling, you know.
Any other questions?
Don't all start at once, guys. Just like
And you all, I mean, you need to know that you did a really good job. So if there's an overwhelmed feeling of what are they saying, why, oh my God, we only have, X number of hours. It always is that way. When you have a 30-minute, it has to become, for the next day, it has to become 10. And there's always a rethinking about how, and maybe you've already, thought about that. But there's real value in evolving your thinking based on today, even if you already had something set up, and operating from a place of, I suspect your authorities on this. I suspect that if we were to put 100 people in a room together, you all would be the ones who know the most about what you're talking about. And that's really important for you to take with you, because otherwise it can feel like, oh my God, this is just too much. It's not. You've already done all the hard stuff. Now it's the human part. How do you persuade? How do you make the point as if it was a matter of life and death about helping a company protect itself from stupidity, or however you want to frame it, which is hardly an elegant way of saying it. But you're in control about anything you want to do tomorrow related to how you show up and how you convey the most important things you feel are important to say.
Ma'am, I do actually have one quick question of just
Good.
a theme that some of you touched on in your feedback, which I'm very grateful for, is visuals. I'm just wondering, what is, if anything, is the most dynamic or impressive non-presentation visual you've seen in your time judging, or in just presentations more broadly of similar formats?
So I'll go first. There's no video or slides tomorrow anyway, so you don't have to show anything. But I think body language is really important. I think that, as we all know, we communicate more effectively with what our body does than our words in some cases. The nonverbals are incredibly important. So as you think about your facial expressions, you think about the tone of your voice, you think about what you choose to stress and not stress, that's what you've got in 10 minutes, It is the physicality, and that's why it's easier if we stand and all of that. But even sitting in our chairs, I mean, some of you had some really good voice tonal varieties that caused people to Leon's point. Yes, we all know that people can space out when listening to someone, that's just part of life. But you can make it harder for people to space out by the way in which you engage. And part of how we engage is with our energy. And I suspect that you all are experts in energy because you have to summon that over and over again. So it is a strength that you have. Think about how to apply that. I mean, you can't overwhelm the poor judge, whoever it is tomorrow, with the whole power of your energy. But, I have a feeling that now that I hope you're feeling more confident, and it's always hard when you haven't done it before, that you already know a lot of the things that you need to use tomorrow, because you use them all the time. It's just that you're not being graded for it when you use it. And you don't need to think about tomorrow as being graded either. This is just a chance to demonstrate what matters to you, that you chose to do. And your energy will help.
One of the things to consider is if you're if you're in person, one of the important things when presenting is eye contact with people in the room. But on Zoom, we have surreptitious eye contact as you look at our screens. But one of the things you should think about doing is actually staring directly at the camera while you're talking.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
then if you're looking at the camera, you really do have eye contact with the person on the other side. Now,
Yeah.
there's no feedback for you because the screen is a blur now. But one of the things to think about in terms of engaging, especially if you don't have visuals, is if you look at the camera, that's going to captivate people. And then, and we sort of do it, and you guys sort of did it because you're looking at the screen, and a lot of us, the camera is sort of just there at the screen. You don't really have to stare at it to be looking at people. But if you really intend to, if you then stare directly at the camera while you're talking, it's a slightly different effect on people.
That's perfect. We are almost out of time. Anyone else have any questions to ask or any, and that was wonderful feedback, Leon. Anyone else, anything?
Hey, Jacob, really quick, just the idea of visuals. One is a visual is just another way of telling your story, like adding, it's just another element. So don't look at it as a thing you have to do. But the realities are, if I can take in information with my ears and with my eyes, there's more information going in. It's just a tool, right? So don't hold yourself to any sort of thing. And I've seen people literally make a list and present it, Harvard professor. I've seen people with like these multimedia presentations. Both blow your mind as long as your content is sound and you speak to the audience and to the truth of what you're saying. That's pretty much it.
So tomorrow there's no Q&A, and we really did give you a hard time. That's our job. You know, that was our job, to give everybody, and that's what we've been doing. There's no Q&A, there's no slides, there's no video. There's just you, and that's enough. So we wish you luck.
Yeah, good luck tomorrow, guys.
Best of luck.
Really well done today, though. Really well done.
A great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for your time and effort.
Awesome. Thank you all so
Thank you
much.
so much
Stay
for your
healthy,
feedback.
guys.